We have some fans. This musical that played 5 performances on Broadway in 2009, and it starred Will Chase and Lenny Wolpe. And by Lenny Wolpe, I mean Malcolm Getz.
That would be impressive.
So Will Chase and Malcolm Getz, so don't get confused, people. The story chronicled the friendship of Tom and Alvin from the age of 6 to 35.
A 2-person musical on Broadway was, of course, extremely risky. In the entire 20th century, guess how many musicals have been produced on Broadway with 2 cast members? No, really, guess. Wow, one. A lot of people are, okay. The answer is 8. In 100 years, 8 2-person musicals have been produced on Broadway. Guess how many of these lasted longer than 3 months? Only 1. And guess what it was? There you
Correct.
go. Awesome.
I do.
But the producers of Story of My Life believed in the show, and they pushed it forward.
Well, when the show opens, Alvin has died under mysterious circumstances, and Tom is trying to write his eulogy. In Tidbits, we're told about how Tom and Alvin grew up together, and Tom became a successful writer, while Alvin became a homebody, taking over his father's bookshop.
The show was sincere, and even the New York Times admitted that it had a timely message that success isn't everything. But many were critical of the fact that the show had little stakes or tension, and people were outright offended that they didn't feel the relationship of the men was ever fully addressed.
Now, Alvin was clearly in love with Tom, who seemed to have feelings for him as well. But as Michael Feingold said, it was a coming-of-age story without glands.
Variety said, Will Chase is a very talented performer, but after Lennon and High Fidelity, one wonders if his agent is sleeping through meetings.
Variety.
Unnecessarily mean to Will Chase, but...
Or his agent.
Hopefully he thinks that's funny now, or I hope he does. That cold February, I wrote that. That cold February in 2009.
Ooh, the winter of '09. It's a cold one.
The show opened and closed in one weekend. I actually saw the show at good speed, and I remember people were very moved and walked out crying.
There's not a lot of light. There was no question the show had some very wonderful performances, and Alvin and Tom's story definitely pulled on the heartstrings. I have recently become obsessed with this musical, and I went YouTube crazy this weekend trying to find every video, and there's only about like 5 or 6 I could find, but they're awesome. And
because that part of the script, I wrote in parentheses, Kevin,
improv.
Personal thoughts.
Go, personal thoughts on how awesome this and touching it is. Anyway. And now to speak about Story of My Life, the man who understudied Alvin on Broadway and was the first to play Tom in the regional premiere, Jim Stanek.
Yeah. There he is.
Thank you. Oh, that's me.
Yeah.
Look at that. I have facial hair.
Same. Facial.
That's awesome. I am so excited to be here. A, because I like talking. B, I really like talking about this show. As they said, I got to understudy the role of Alvin on Broadway for those 2.5 weeks of previews and the 5 performances. I really thought my kids were going to eat for a while, and it didn't happen. They're eating right now. Don't worry. A couple months after we closed, I got a call from Bud Martin, who was one of the producers of the Broadway production, and he said, Jim, I got a good idea. You're going to come down here to Philadelphia to my theater, and you're going to be in The Story of My Life. And I said, awesome, that's a great idea. So then he said, but here's the hitch. You're going to play Thomas. I was like, but I understudied Alvin. And he was like, yeah, I got that. I was there. He said, but I got somebody down here who can play Alvin, and I want you to play Thomas. I was like, okay. And he said, how about this? I'll sweeten the deal. He said, the guy who's going to play Alvin can't do the last week. He said, so I'll play Thomas, and you'll play Alvin. And I don't know if it was ego or stupidity. I said, sure, you bet. So I actually got to play both parts. And then what I think is a testament to this show, me and Tony Braithwaite, who played Alvin, we won a Barrymore Award for Best Ensemble. Even though we were up against a big Mark Jacoby revival of Fiddler on the Roof, we were against a huge production of Light and Piazza, which took most all of the other awards. But our little 2-person musical won Best Ensemble. Thank you. I was just plugging the show, not myself. But I think that's a testament to the show. It really, if you get to see it, or if you hear anybody that's doing it, or if you have an opportunity to do it or produce it, please do so, because I really, I was quoted in one of the Philadelphia papers saying that if I could make my living and feed my 3 children by just doing this show for the rest of my career, I would. And I truly mean that, and I really do. So I decided, I didn't decide, but Jennifer decided, when we were talking about the fact, we were talking about the fact that I had played both roles, she said, well, why don't you do one of each character? And I was like, you bet, more time. That's cool. So I'm going to start with a song by Thomas, the writer character. He is there to write a eulogy for his friend Alvin, who has passed away, and he's got writer's block. So he sort of channels Alvin to come and give him some encouragement. So Alvin pulls out a book report. This is a prop. This is not the lyrics, although I may need the lyrics. We'll see. But he pulls out a book report from 6th grade to inspire Tom to remind him that he knows how to write stories. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, a book report by Tommy Weaver, 6th grade. I got this book from my friend Alvin and his mystical... Anyway, it's a really good story, but my favorite part is in the preface. It goes like this. Part of my plan has been to try to pleasantly remind adults of what they once were themselves and of how they felt and thought and talked, and what queer enterprises they sometimes engaged in. The author, Hartford, 1876. In 1876, cars were not invented. They didn't have the radio or movies or TV. And they had more diseases then, which now can be prevented. But someone wrote a book that year that still gets read by kids today like me. In 1876, there wasn't indoor plumbing. They didn't have a ton of things we take for granted now. Though every year there seems to be some luxury that's coming. A book like this from way back then is still around somehow. I guess I used to think that books were only words on paper. But when I'm reading this, it's like Tom Sawyer's really here. When things are written down, they don't just disappear like vapor. They travel on through time beyond that one specific year. And I think writing stuff like that would make a neat career. In 1876, some guy from Missouri put all these adventures down and made them come alive. And just because that writer wrote this one amazing story, 1876 was so much better than 1875. Thank you. All right, so if you didn't like that, hopefully you did. But hopefully you've left room for this song, which some of you may know. This song is sung by Alvin to Thomas, also towards the beginning of the show, to try to pull him out of his writer's block. And he decides to tell him a story. Oh, you know what? Something just crossed my mind really fast. They showed a picture of the opening night party. This is, you guys are here for inside stories, I think. At least these guys are. Okay, so I don't think I told you this one. They showed a picture of the opening night party. This was one of the lowest points of my career because we went to the party after the opening, and me and Bradley Dean, who was the other understudy, were lined up out there with our wives, and somebody pulls us over and, hey, we're going to take you in the back way. We're like, awesome, great, I don't have to wade through this, bunch of people. So So we're upstairs on the 4th floor, and we're standing there for a while, and Bradley's like looking around. I love Bradley very much. He's got a little bit of conspiracy theorist in him. So he was like looking real suspicious. And we walked in, there was a table right there for me and Bradley. It's like, yeah, this is awesome. So my wife brings me some food, and we're chatting and everything. And then Bradley's like, where are the boys? I don't know, they're probably doing press or something. No, it's been a long time. Where are they? I don't know, I'm sure they're getting some food or something. And then the stage manager came over, and he was like, where are the guys? She's like, oh, they're probably at the other party. What other party? Bradley promptly left, and we found out there was an opening night party down there on the 1st floor it was a 2-person musical! There wasn't enough room for the 2 understudies and the stage manager? Seriously? God, it must have been all those investors that invested so much that we could last 5 shows! Anyway, I got that chip off my shoulder. I saw that picture and so much came back. Anyway.
I'm so sorry I included that picture. I had no idea.
That's okay.
But now I'm glad because we got that story. I'm sorry, Jim.
But I extended your running time by about an hour. So, let's go back to the show, and this is a song by Alvin, sung to Thomas, it's a story. He says it's easy to tell a story, or to write a eulogy, just tell a story, like this one. The beginning, a story about Alvin Kelby. My mom passed away in the summer I turned 6 and left a single father and his son. But Dad had the bookstore with a leaky roof to fix, so I was on my own, facing the unknown, the terrifying prospect of grade 1. But at the time, how was I to see? A kind and gentle soul was waiting there for me. Mrs. Remington, our first grade teacher, made elementary school a better place. But her single most disturbing feature was the coarse black hair on her face. Maybe she was menopausal, lack of estrogen will cause a lot of odd conditions, some acute. The irony would never phase her namesake of a famous razor, and to be so facially hirsute. But Mrs. Remington smiled, and she would brighten my day. Back then, a teacher hugged you to make you feel okay, though my face sort of stung from Mrs. Remington's beard. When she held me, my problems disappeared. Mrs. Lynch was an ignoramus. Mr. Pollock was just plain mean. Mrs. Remington was nearly famous for her parties at Halloween. Pumpkin heads of every shape were cut out of construction paper. Each and every one would be displayed. The highlight for the children was to make a really special costume for the yearly Halloween parade. And Mrs. Remington smiled, and she was clearly content as she lovingly presided over the main event. So we nervously walked past her critical eyes as we vie for Mrs. Remington's top prize. There was this one kid wearing a coat hanger halo, cardboard wings, carrying a bell and a homemade book that said Tom Sawyer. Nobody had a clue who he was supposed to be, except me. Mrs. Remington, I know. Pamela Koshin thought he was the Statue of Liberty. Mrs. Remington, I know. Donnie Carter thought he was a Thanksgiving turkey. Mrs. Remington, I know. He's Clarence the Angel from It's a Wonderful Life. He was my mother's favorite. The class laughed, I cried, and Mrs. Remington announced that I was next. But Mrs. Remington smiled in that way that she had, a smile that made you realize that things were not so bad. And I knew from her face that this feeling would pass. So I went to take my turn before the class. those poor kids were still trying to figure out who the heck Clarence was when I shuffled onto the platform with fuzzy slippers and bathrobe with pink sponge curlers in my hair. Alvin Kelby? Mrs. Remington said. Who are you supposed to be? I'm a ghost. The ghost of my mother. Lunch that day was awful lonely, sitting by myself and only wearing fuzzy slippers and chenille. While all the kids were making fun, in came Mrs. Remington with Clarence dragging slowly on her heel. Clarence, she said, I'd like you to meet Mrs. Kelby. She's a big fan of yours. And Mrs. Remington smiled, 'cause Mrs. Remington knew that the battlefield of childhood was easier with two. And Mrs. Remington watched as the angels do. And on Halloween that year, she saw two masks disappear when my mother met her angel and I met you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.